Life in the Philippines is not what you think it is. I'm shooting today's video to fill you in on my very personal experience that I accumulated during my time in the Philippines. This experience is based on a digital nomad's perspective, on a digital nomad's life. And I wanted to fill you in on this because wherever you go, you have good and bad stuff. And expectation does not always meet reality. And the Philippines is no exception. So what I want you to learn or get out of this video is just an honest overview of what somebody experienced who actually lived in the Philippines, so you can make the right decision for yourself as to whether to move there or potentially try a nearby country. I don't want to throw the Philippines under the bus. The Philippines is a great country, and I'm going to get to this right now because I don't only want to talk about the bad stuff, I want to talk about the good stuff too. And what initially inspired me to move to the Philippines was, of course, tropical beaches. I mean, come on, there's really few places in the entire world that have better beaches than the Philippines. And we're talking about beaches that you can get on most islands, you know? We're talking about crystal clear waters. We're talking, just peaceful beaches with nobody on them. We're talking about tropical weather throughout the year. We're talking about a peaceful tropical experience, unlike anything that you have ever experienced in your life. And that's inspiring to people because that's what people want, right? If they think about the Philippines, they think about the tropical beaches, the cheap cost of living, the dating. So the tropical beaches was a big factor for me, for sure, without a question, because before I moved to Southeast Asia, I was living back at home because I was building my online business and I was hustling really, really hard. I was working 12 to 16 hours a day. Sometimes I've worked for 2 days straight just to make enough income so I can save money, so I can move to a place so I can really, really live that tropical beach lifestyle that everybody wants so bad. So we're talking, Cebu, we're talking about Mualboal, Malabascua, Palawan, Boracay. We're talking about the most beautiful beaches there are in the Philippines. And that was inspiring to me because I was after this, because that was my motivation behind everything that I did going forward. It was really important. And then of course, the next thing that is really good in the Philippines, and that's also true for guys who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even, is the dating scene. The Philippines just has one of the best dating scenes in the entire world. Age doesn't matter. You could potentially call it your Shangri-La, the place where you don't age. Because age doesn't really matter in the Philippines. Neither does size. Nobody's gonna judge you based on your age or whatever you look like. It doesn't matter. The women are there and there's an abundance of them, and guys like that. Guys like to be hunted. Guys don't like to be the hunter like it is in the West. And that's something that you can get in the Philippines. So the dating scene, great, phenomenal. Dating opportunities you have in the Philippines, you're not going to have in your home country, because women, they want to know you, they want to be with you, and they are willing to work hard to prove to you that they're better than all the other women who are lining up for you. And women are just willing to work really hard to be with you because they know they're in a competitive race. They know they are competing with so many other local women, because there is probably 100 Filipinas, trying to be together with one guy, that they have to prove really, really much, and they have to work really, really hard to get you to like them. And that's something that's really important. In the West, it's reversed. You have to show the best possible version of yourself. You have to work hard. You have to look good. You have to be, if you want to be with a woman that's a 6 out of 10, she expects you to be an 8 out of 10. And we're talking about the whole spectrum of things, We're talking about inner qualities, character. We're talking about physical appearance. We're talking about sex. We're talking about financial success. We're talking about vision. We're talking about, social circle, like fitness, sport, health. We're talking about all of this. So in the West, it's very, very competitive. Whereas in the Philippines, for you, it isn't. The women need to compete in order to be with you. And that's a big difference. And guys want that, no question about that. Now that we talked about the good stuff, let's talk about the bad stuff. And there is a lot that I want to point out. When I moved to the Philippines, I was running a consultancy, and obviously, I had to be on Skype calls all the time. And what was more important than anything was the internet connection. And that was a problem for me back then. So I was in the middle of a Skype call and I was hoping to have a reliable connection with Globe, which is one of the main internet providers in the Philippines. And I was on a call, with a client, they paid me money for coaching them CPA marketing, affiliate marketing. And what happened was that the call dropped in the middle of the conversation. That is unacceptable because you want to create a business. You want to run a business in the Philippines. And if you work online, I don't care if you're a digital nomad, if you were some kind of an online coach, if you were a trader, if you were running a consultancy, whatever you are doing online, you need a reliable internet connection. Because if not, you are not making money. You are losing clients, you are losing money, you are losing progress, because the internet is so vital that there's just no replacement for it. And that was something that just didn't work for me. I was with Globe and it was already years ago. And like I told you, I lived on the island of Mactan, Cebu, and it was just impossible to get a reliable, stable internet connection going. And it got so annoying that I actually ended up booking a hotel, even if it was just for one night. And then I scheduled all the calls for that day because I had no other option, because the internet connection back home didn't work and it wasn't cheap. It was $60, $70 a month. So I took one of the best plans that they had back then and it still didn't work for me. Very unfortunate. And then when I booked the hotel in Cebu City, I also had the same problem there. So I didn't know what to do, because you know how it is when you rent an apartment, you have a rental contract, and when you breach the rental contract, even if the internet is not good, they don't care about that there. They don't care about that. They're not going to refund you your deposit. I mean, wake up. That's just not an option, So if you want to move out, you lose your deposit. If you move out prematurely, then you lose your deposit. That's just what I wanted to add here. If you move out, after the contract expires, you're good because, you did not breach the contract. But if you are not doing that, then that's obviously a problem. And so I had no other choice after some time than to leave, because I couldn't run my business. I couldn't operate. And it was just frustrating. And some clients, they were understanding, some weren't, because all they care about is performance. They want to perform and they want you to perform for them, because if you're an online coach, then that's what's required, because you're getting paid consulting fees. I didn't like the mass poverty in the Philippines, and we're talking about everywhere. I mean, the Philippines is the poorest country in whole Southeast Asia that I've probably been to. Laos is also pretty bad, but the Philippines, nothing beats the Philippines in terms of poverty. It's just really, really poor. Usually those things don't bother you as much when everything else works out in your life. But when things don't go well, when things bother you already, like the internet connection is bad or you get food poison and then this comes on top, I mean, it's just problem after problem after problem, and it builds a vicious negative cycle that doesn't really inspire you. It's just the opposite. And I've had this so many times. Whenever I went to shopping malls outside, people ask for money. Whenever I walked in the streets during day, during night, people ask for money. It was just everywhere. And it got annoying after time. First, for instance, when I was in Vietnam, that happens in Vietnam too, but it mainly happens in very touristy spots and not as persistent. People are not as persistent as in the Philippines. In the Philippines, it's pretty bad. The standard of living is another big problem in the Philippines. And what I mean by that is, if you compare what gets you $300 in Thailand to what gets you $300 in the Philippines, you can definitely see that there is a difference in value. Let me give you an example. I have a couple of friends that live in Bangkok, Thailand. I know some guys, I'm friends with some guys. They're big internet marketers. They're making a boatload of money, yet they live very cheaply in Thailand because they can do that. They can rent a 1-bedroom or a studio apartment and only pay maybe $300 or $400 a month. And that apartment is fully furnished. It's modern. It includes all utilities. And it's nicely furnished. It's in a good neighborhood. It's just great. I mean, it's a really reasonable price. If you would have the same apartment in the Philippines in a similar neighborhood, that offers the same good stuff around, it would be like double or triple in terms of price. I mean, the apartments in the Philippines, if you want to have really nice furnishings, it's going to be expensive, right? And that's again because of the location. The Philippines is a very isolated place. It's a group of islands, and it's pretty far away from, most countries, with the exception of potentially Vietnam and potentially Malaysia. But, things just aren't produced in the Philippines. We're talking furniture. Everything's imported. So in order for the government, in order for companies to make money, they need to pay import tax. They need to pay a supplier in another country to get stuff shipped over there. And of course, there is more people in the middle. And whenever there is more people in the middle, it obviously increases how much you, the consumer, pays for a product or service. And that's very prominent in the Philippines. So whatever you pay for a couch, let's say you pay $300 for a couch in Thailand, you're probably going to pay a lot more for it in the Philippines. So increases rental as well, rental prices as well. And that's just so true. Healthcare is another big issue in the Philippines. And I knew a guy, it was already years ago, and he ended up with typhoid in the Philippines. Not something pleasant to happen. I always got my typhoid vaccine. I don't think he did, or his expired and he didn't renew it, didn't get a booster, whatever the problem was for him. He ended up in the hospital for a few weeks, and it was everything but pleasant. Being in the hospital in the Philippines is probably not what you want. It just isn't. That is something that's scary, because unless you are in Manila, in Metro Manila, where you have really good hospitals, chances are you're not going to get the treatment that you think you can if you're in a place like Thailand, if you're in a place like Malaysia, where there is just more hospitals around that even a Western person can go to. In the Philippines, if you live in a place like Palawan, if you live in Bohol, you don't have any first-class hospitals there. You just don't. Some of them exist in Manila. You have some in Makati. You have some in Beneficiary, Global City, and some other places in Metro Manila. But other than that, if you are in a different city in the Philippines, it's going to be tough. If you need something serious done, you probably have to fly out of the country, maybe fly into Singapore, maybe fly into Japan and get it done there. Potentially Malaysia is another option. But a lot of people that live in the Philippines, they have problem with the healthcare system there. The food has been another issue for me, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Generally speaking, the food on the islands, on the smaller islands in the Philippines, we're talking about, the beach towns where tourists frequent, the food there is actually pretty good. But if we're talking about the Filipino food that you get in the cities, it's everything but delicious, in my experience. Okay, and now a lot of people are going to judge me. A lot of Filipinos are probably going to say, well, you haven't tried everything, or never come to our country again. You're regarded as una persona non grata. They're coming up with all these phrases because they just don't want to swallow the truth pill. But from what I've experienced, the food on the island of Boracay was great. The food in places like Moalboal, the food in places like Malabascua. I've been to all those places, and the food there has been good. There's been a lot of foreign restaurants. There's also been, very focused Filipino restaurants. And generally speaking, the food there has been really good. So I have no complaints there. But where I am complaining about the food quality is in places like Cebu City, especially Mactan, where you don't really have any good food. You could argue, well, Korean food potentially, which is not cheap. Japanese ramen, not cheap. But the Filipino food that you have in places like Manila or Mactan there is just a lack of variety. It's just not the same quality as the local food that you have in Thailand. Thailand's food is much better. It's cheaper. There's more variety, and probably not going to get food poisoned as much as in the Philippines. Are there any other pros and cons of living in the Philippines? And what is your experience living in the country? Leave a comment below and let us know. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'm uploading new videos on digital nomad locations, travel updates, and investment advice several times a week right now. I highly recommend that you grab a free copy of my latest ebook, The Nomad Elite Income Booster, your go-to guide for creating passive income streams using the internet. And if you got some more time left, check out these videos. Thank you for watching.